Thank you for tuning in to the Voice of the Victim podcast. We discuss a lot of sad and potentially triggering things on this show. We try to be as sensitive and cautious as possible, but if you are sensitive to things involving abuse and may be triggered, please think twice before listening to our show.
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. My name is Ryan.
And I'm Rosie.
How are you doing tonight, Rosie?
I am doing swell. It's snowing here.
Yeah, it is. I'm really curious if it's going to accumulate, because if so, I'll have to be clearing off the driveway soon. But,
good stuff.
Yeah. Before we get started tonight, we want to thank our new patrons. Rosie, you want to take a whack at this?
I don't know how to say her name. Is it Ksenia? Ksenia?
Yes.
Ksenia?
Yep.
Oh,
she
yay.
described how to pronounce it, and I almost put that in the outline, but I just want to see how you said it first. But yeah, she said it's like Kenya, except Ksenia. So
pretty.
Thank you,
pretty.
Ksenia.
Thank you.
And also Claire.
Thank you,
Claire. Claire is our patron, and she also is a podcaster. Mm-hmm. She does the Exercise and Depression podcast, which we definitely recommend you check out. It's very cool.
For sure.
Very heartfelt, and if you do struggle with depression, it's very relatable and, just encouraging. Mm-hmm. So check that out if you want. So, Rosie, will you read this review we have this week?
Yes. It's entitled Rosie and Ryan. It says, "It is so refreshing to hear a compassionate podcast tackling the issues they feel are important. The empathy you have when shining a spotlight on cases that need attention is admirable. I was looking back through old reviews, and it's so cool to see how you've changed. I've been a listener since Erica Parsons."
Wow, episode 28, I think.
I can't believe you can remember the numbers like that.
Yeah, it's weird.
"And grown in response to critiques, less interruption, more conversational, etc. This is a podcast I re-listen to because it is moving and informative and has lovely hosts. Give the cats a head scratch for me." Aww.
That's from Lee and Thea.
That's so sweet.
I think that's how you pronounce it. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I worry sometimes because a lot of our old episodes were so long ago. Mm-hmm. I'm like, did I say stupid stuff?
They're so cringy to listen to.
Yeah. It's weird having so much of your speaking out there in the public from your thoughts over the years, because people change, people's ideas and ideals change. But I think in general we've pretty much stayed the same when it comes to telling our stories. So besides becoming better podcasters, as people tell us, we try at least. But thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Hey, this is Ryan just popping in quick here because we forgot to mention this while we were recording. But last week, since we didn't have a main feed episode, we still put out a Patreon episode, our 19th premium episode. So if you're a patron, definitely go check that out. This episode of Voice of the Victim podcast is brought to you by Thousand Fell. Thousand Fell has created the world's first 100% recyclable circular sneaker. It's called Full Circle Footwear because it will never be one of those things that ends up taking up space in a dump that will never break down into dirt.
If you listened to my new Patreon episode, then you know that I'm trying to be better about knowing where my products come from and how they're made. Thousand Fell sneakers are crafted in a family-owned factory in Franca, Brazil, with 3 decades of high-end shoemaking experience. Thousand Fell sneakers are 100% recyclable, 100% vegan, certified by PETA, stain and water-resistant, blister-proof, and are zero waste.
Well, that's a lot of stuff.
I know!
On top of that, they're also antimicrobial and coated with aloe vera, which naturally combats bacteria and repels odors, so you're able to go sockless, not worry about them getting smelly before they're even worn out.
That's so cool.
Right? Thousand Fell sneakers are designed from innovative leatherless materials, and I gotta say, they're very sleek looking. They're also backed by their brand-owned recycling program, which guarantees the sneakers will never wind up in a landfill.
The ones that I've been looking at are the laceless white with the green accents on the back.
Ooh.
So cute. Thousand Fell sneakers not only do good, they look good, feel good, and they're built to last. And that's why Vogue said, quote, "These sneakers bring both a cool factor and practicality."
In Vogue. So go check out Thousand Fell sneakers today. And after you buy your sneakers, be sure to tell them who sent you on their post-purchase survey. That's thousandfell.com. So the story we're sharing tonight, Rosie actually found it after we were watching a YouTube video about conspiracy theories that ended up being true. Mm-hmm. And she started looking into MK Ultra.
Scary stuff, guys.
A dark rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a bad rabbit hole to go down.
But she found this story about a woman named Esther Schrier, and I tried to find a video about her, and I couldn't. So I was really surprised, and that's why we wanted to talk about the story. The article Rosie found was talking about the CBC podcast called Brainwashed, which spends 6 episodes talking about Esther's story. Tonight, we're doing the VOV style treatment, and it's about Esther and her son Lloyd. Mm-hmm. So, Rosie, are you ready to jump into it?
Yes. It's just scary. This is like a really freaky topic to me.
I know. It definitely made my mind do jumping jacks.
Yeah.
And flip-flops.
It shook me and put me in a rabbit hole for hours. Anyway, moving on.
Makes you question everything.
Yeah. Esther Schrier was born in 1932 in the Montreal area of Quebec, Canada.
Now, this story is pretty buried and hard to find info on, so I couldn't find her exact birth date or her parents' names. Schrier was her married name, but we do know that she had an older brother.
When Esther was only 4 years old in 1936, tragedy struck her life. Her father suddenly died, which left his wife alone to care for their children. But just over a year after that, Esther's mother was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Now, being in the mid to late 30s, this was just a few years after a seemingly revolutionary and groundbreaking new treatment had been invented.
Mm-hmm. In 1936, the first lobotomy had been performed in the United States to treat anxiety and depression. Despite the first lobotomy patient, Alice Hood Hammett, suffering convulsions the week after the operation and dying 5 years later, the operation was declared a success. That's insane.
Yeah.
I will never understand how this was a good idea.
Yeah, and this was not that long ago in the grand scheme of history.
And so, when Esther Schrier's mother was treated for her brain tumor, she received a lobotomy.
Yeah, so as you would imagine, this led to her being unable to care for her children anymore, and she was committed to a psychiatric institution. And it's unbelievable that this practice survived for over a decade, but this meant that Esther and her siblings had lost both of their parents within 2 years of each other, and Esther was still only 5 or 6 years old.
Esther and her older brother got shuffled around between the care of different relatives, as well as foster homes. None of the places they stayed at were ideal, and it's said that they suffered wherever they went.
We're not exactly sure what that means, but it's clear that Esther had a really rough childhood. But she was resilient and didn't let this discourage her from doing the best she could.
Esther trained as a nurse in her late teens and went on to get a job at the Jewish General Hospital in Montreal. As time went on, Esther was starting to look for someone to spend her life with, and she was set up on a blind date.
Which, to me, that would take a lot of bravery. I don't think I would do very well on a blind date.
I don't think I would either. I would hate it, actually.
Yeah. The anxiety beforehand would just be too much.
The man she met was named Haskell Schrier, and they went on to get married in 1955 and became a well-known family within the Jewish community in Montreal. I hope I said his name right.
I think it's Haskell.
Oh, I was trying to be fancy. 3 years later, they had a baby girl named Lynn Carroll, and the pregnancy and birth seemed to go well.
But after 3 weeks, baby Lynn developed a staph infection, and she died. So this is not what they were expecting, because it seemed like she was healthy when she was born. And Esther took this really hard, and felt somewhat responsible for her daughter's death.
This woman has not had it easy, ever. 2 years after this horrible tragedy, she got pregnant again, but she was still struggling with the grief and self-imposed guilt over the death of baby Lynn. This gave her overwhelming anxiety, and she was starting to struggle with other aspects of her life.
Yeah, it got so bad that her family decided to get her some professional help. And like you said, it's so sad after all she'd been through as a child and how hard she worked to get to this point and make something of her life. She was hopeful that this would finally be that happy ending and things would go the way she wanted them to. But her first baby died suddenly, unexpectedly. I can't imagine the pain that would cause.
Esther's husband was on the lookout for a very good doctor that would be able to help his wife with her anxiety. And he read an article about a doctor who worked at the Allen Memorial Institute, which was known for being on the cutting edge of healthcare. It was the psychiatry department of the Royal Victoria Hospital and McGill University Health Center. This doctor specialized in psychiatric care, and his name was Ewan Cameron.
This man was a big deal in the mental health field at the time. He had been the president of the American Psychiatric Association in 1952 and 1953, and then the president of the Canadian Psychiatric Association from 58 to 59, as well as the American Psychopathological Association in 1963. So, huge deal. According to some people, he was considered godlike in his abilities as a doctor.
Wow. So, yeah, they thought this was a good choice.
Yeah, the best money could buy.
He was also the first director of the Allen Memorial Institute, better known as the Allen, in Montreal, where he worked when Haskell Schrier was seeking care for his wife. In February of 1960, Esther Schrier arrived at the Allen Hospital, ready to receive the best care money could buy at the time, or at least that's what her family thought.
Yeah, so her family left her there in the care of the hospital with hopes that the next time they saw her, she'd be feeling better, better equipped to deal with the trauma that she'd been through, the loss and grief. But once they left, they had no idea what was actually going to happen to her.
The first step in her treatment was to put her in a special room called the sleep room. This was a room where patients were put into drug-induced comas to sleep. Patients spend all their time in this room, asleep, except for 3 times a day when they were woken up to eat and use the restroom. She spent her first 30 days in this room.
Yeah, that's a lot of time sleeping. And most people these days know that if you don't use your muscles, they atrophy and become very weak. And this is what happened to Esther. In those 30 days of never leaving the bed, she lost 13 pounds of mostly muscle mass.
Can we just stop and say how insane this is? That this was the first step? Like, this was a step in treatment?
Yeah.
That this was a thing?
And like we'll talk about, this is part of their process for creating a clean slate to work with.
Mm-hmm. By the end of this 30-day period, Esther wasn't even able to stand up because she was too weak.
And remember, Esther was pregnant with her second child at this point.
I forgot about that. I'm glad you mentioned that again. Esther's second round of treatment was called de-patterning.
Yeah, de-patterning. And this is when things went from mildly unhealthy to just downright harmful. The quote-unquote cutting-edge Dr. Ewan Cameron believed that breaking a patient's mind down to a childlike state would allow him to work from a clean slate so he could easily reprogram the patients to be exactly what he thought they should be.
Great. To accomplish this clean slate, he used a combination of mind-altering drugs and electroshock therapy. Then he would play recorded messages to the patient through headphones, helmets, or speakers for up to 20 hours a day, whether they were sleeping or not, to program them. I also read that he would even put like a speaker in the pillow. So think about that. If you even took off the headphones and the helmet and stuff and just wanted some relief, you were laying on your pillow and you can still hear these messages. Can you imagine how insane you would feel?
No, it would be so frustrating.
The doctor called this psychic driving.
Yeah, so he's literally trying to shape the patient's minds with these recordings, which is really freaky, trying to make everyone exactly the same after wiping their minds. But let's talk about the results of Esther's first month. Now, when she arrived in February, Esther was a functional person suffering from postpartum depression and anxiety, as well as grieving over the death of her daughter. But Rosie, what did the medical records report on March 12th, 1960, after she'd spent just 1 month in this treatment?
Esther was considered completely depatterned by that point. She had trouble swallowing, she could no longer speak, and she was completely incontinent.
So that doesn't sound like what you'd think they'd be targeting or hoping for after treating a grown pregnant woman for a month. It just doesn't sound therapeutic or like a good result.
On top of that, when her husband visited her, Esther didn't know who he was. Her mind had completely been wiped. But according to Dr. Ewan Cameron, it was a success. Now he could reprogram her.
Yeah, in her patient notes 2 days earlier, they wrote that the depatterning was not yet complete because she wasn't yet incontinent or mute. That was literally their goal, which is so scary.
During her time at the hospital, the treatment started causing her to develop some gynecological symptoms where she would bleed.
Again, she was pregnant, so this is a bad sign.
But after getting her some treatment and letting her rest for a few days, they would jump right back into the treatments. By August 17th, 1960, over the first 6 months she was there, she had received 29 electroshock treatments. Oh, I can't even grasp this treatment.
I know. And these weren't, mild shocks. They were pretty extreme. Like, as far as the scale of electroshock therapy goes, they were very intense.
But they paused the treatments at this time because she was in her 8th month of pregnancy.
So this whole time she's getting these treatments, she has a baby inside her, which this can't be good for a baby.
No.
But on September 27th, 1960, her first baby boy, Lloyd, was born, and he was healthy. And you would hope that this would bring Esther joy because she finally has a healthy baby after losing her first baby. But the state of mind she was in after this was complete helplessness.
She now had this newborn baby, but she wasn't able to remember basic life functions. She couldn't remember how to take care of her baby.
Yeah, remember, Esther was a trained nurse. She was driven and smart. She had this covered with her, who she was before she got this treatment. Now she couldn't even remember the most natural instinct of a mother.
So Esther was completely done with her treatment when she was 8 months pregnant?
Yeah, after she gave birth.
Okay. Esther went on to talk about her time as a new mother after this treatment. She said, "I had a new baby, and I didn't know what to do with the baby. I had help, a baby nurse, but she had to have a day off and left me with a book. And I'll just give you a little example from the book. When you hear the baby cry, go to the room, pick up baby." And then she wrote out step by step how to feed the baby, and that was very frightening.
Yeah.
I can't...
So sad.
I'm glad to know that she learned how to talk again.
Yeah, I know. Because at the end of this treatment, she was mute.
Yeah.
And incontinent. Like, completely helpless. And an adult woman who had been in nursing school, she knew how to take care of other people, and now she couldn't even take care of herself or her own baby. This is not the way any kind of treatment should have gone.
No, I wonder how her husband felt when he saw her again after this.
Well, heartbroken, I would imagine, because they deleted her personality. Like, everything that he fell in love with about her was gone. She didn't even know who she was. And now, he played a huge role in helping her get through the rest of her life. Like, she was dependent on him. he had to basically take care of her like a child after this.
Mm-hmm. For the rest of her life, Esther was not herself. She had regressed to a nearly helpless state, able to relearn some basic tasks, but never to get back to who she was, a loving, caring nurse and mother.
It's so sad because she obviously wanted to be a mother and a good mother so badly. The fact that the death of her baby girl Lynn was so hard on her shows how much she loved her children. And yet, before her baby Lloyd was even born, everything that made Esther herself was taken from her by some arrogant doctor who viewed this pregnant mother, as well as many other people, as test subjects. And he thought he was God's gift to them, and he was able to fool so many people into believing him too, which is scary. And we'll talk about that more later. The people that actually backed up his methods and his research.
Many patients of Ewan Cameron left his care as completely broken people, their personalities deleted from their own minds.
Well, apparently, like I mentioned earlier, the form of electroshock therapy he used was very extreme. And I think, it can be beneficial in mild doses. We know people who have benefited from modern mild shock therapy. But this guy was relentless and seemingly careless. He did so many treatments, and they were so extreme. He was just no holds barred in his approach.
All across Canada, families were ripped apart by divorce, and children were taken to foster homes because of the damage that these treatments caused to the patients.
Yeah, it was a ripple effect out through all these families because they all lost someone.
Esther's son, Lloyd, sees himself as lucky. He says that the only side effect he knew of was that he was a bit slow in the beginning, but went on to lead a relatively normal life. The effects on him, while in utero, were much more mild than they were on his mother. But he still struggled. He had to work much harder than the average student to get through school, but he did it, and actually even went on to go to college and get a bachelor's degree in commerce. But it turns out that this experimental treatment, from the use of mind-altering drugs to electroshock therapy, was all part of a commission from the CIA with partial funding from the Canadian government.
That's right. Civilian people were unknowingly subjected to experimental treatments as part of a secret government-backed program. And the actual goal behind these experiments was shockingly nefarious. They were trying to create an effective brainwashing technique to use on foreign, people they were interrogating. It was part of the MKUltra subproject 68.
Dr. Ewan Cameron subjected his unknowing patients to these forms of psychological torture and personality theft as free and non-consenting participants in a medical trial.
Yeah, typically, people who are experimented on are paid a good amount usually, and they sign waivers acknowledging the risk they're about to take. But these poor people were seeking real medical care in hopes of healing and getting better, and their lives were destroyed. They paid the doctor to ruin their lives, and all to produce what would become the CIA's textbook on torture, basically, the Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Handbook.
So soon, over on Patreon, we'll be doing a full premium episode diving into that. We'll discuss the history of Dr. Cameron and his practices. But this handbook actually suggests interrogation methods like sensory deprivation, threats and fear, pain, hypnosis, and narcosis.
I had to look up what narcosis is, but it's basically sedation, keeping patients in a drug-induced drowsy stupor. But Cameron learned all these things by experimenting on these innocent and completely unaware people. All these horrible things that, it's just inhumane to do to anyone, enemies or not. And it was backed by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency as well as the Canadian government. And yet the suffering and long-lasting effects on the victims of this project has only been officially acknowledged twice in the years since this happened, and the reparations offered for all of this damage were underwhelming and frustrating to the victims.
When I was reading through this article, the original one, and I read that they paid Nazi doctors for the information they collected from their testing on the poor people in concentration camps, like that was like the cherry on top of freaking me out. Like,
they were basically like, World War II was horrible. Everything you're doing was horrible, but can we get those notes?
But can we pay you money for you to come here and help us? Like, it just...
Continue your research about how to...
I mean, obviously, if anybody has, like, read about Dr. Mengele, which I have, and I've also terrified myself, and then Ryan says I'm banned from reading stuff like that. Like, oh my gosh, that kind of stuff freaks me out more than anything else. I can't handle it, and then to read that, just, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Makes you feel real uneasy.
Yeah, that's crazy. And we'll talk more about that next week.
Yeah.
Or not next week, but over on Patreon. Now, so like I mentioned, the victims were not happy about this, and as you would, they wanted to seek some kind of reparations because their lives were literally ruined unknowingly by their own government. So what happened in the 1980s, Rosie?
Well, in the 1980s, 9 of Cameron's patients sued the CIA for the inhumane treatment during MK Ultra. But in 1988, it was settled out of court, and the victims received some payment. But the CIA never officially accepted any responsibility or apologized to the victims for the inhumane and criminal treatment of these people. Esther was actually not among these 9 complainants in the 80s because she was too embarrassed by her mental health challenges at the time to let people know. Oh, I can't. They didn't even apologize or like accept responsibility. How could? I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around.
And it's so sad that Esther felt that she would be shamed or blamed for what happened to her and was too embarrassed to actually come out about it.
Right. That also is infuriating because she had no hand in this.
Yeah. She was a victim of the doctor and the government agencies. And it makes me so sad that she would have felt ashamed of this at all.
Then listen to this. Eventually, it came out that the Canadian government had provided even more funding to Cameron's research for a longer time than the CIA did. Crazy. In 1994, almost 20 years after the criminal experiments were publicly exposed, the Canadian government offered compensation to people who were subjects of Cameron's experiments from 1950 to 1965. The potential beneficiaries had to prove that they had experienced full or substantial depattering.
You have a rough time with that word, don't you?
Yeah.
Depatterning.
Depatterning to be eligible.
So basically, it doesn't matter if you were only partially destroyed by these experiments. It had to be absolutely life-shattering, or you need not apply, basically. The ill effects you suffered at the hands of this monster were only valid if you were substantially depatterned by him, which is sick.
It's interesting to me that these people that were experimented on in the 50s and 60s, they were probably full-grown adults, most of them.
Yeah, if they were 20 in 1950.
So who knows how many of these people are even like still around in 1994.
Well, yeah, especially after all the damage done to them.
Yeah, so
then it's 40 years later.
Not only did they have to survive until the 90s, but then they have to like apply to make sure they're that destroyed
and go through all the stress of applying for this and all the.
It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I can't get over the fact that you had to be substantially depatterned. It doesn't matter if they did some experimental research on you that caused some damage. It had to be full depatterning to get any of this reparation pay.
Yeah.
Just makes me sick.
The Canadian government ended up paying out $7.7 million, $100,000 to each 77 different people who had been patients and subsequent victims of Dr. Cameron. And yet, Lloyd didn't qualify for this payout because although he was in the womb of Esther and had suffered ill effects because of the irresponsible actions of the government and Dr. Cameron, the damage done to him was irrelevant because he wasn't a patient.
I'm sorry, but since when is collateral damage invalid? All of the issues he dealt with because of this were still caused by them.
Well, he technically was a patient. He was a living little dude.
You would think he spent that same time in the hospital that his mom did.
Yeah.
And he was born while she was there.
Lloyd even took his case to the Canadian Federal Court in 1996, but a judge denied Lloyd, upholding the previous decision because Lloyd wasn't a, quote, patient.
It's so frustrating because he's still a victim of the crimes of these people. But because he wasn't officially a patient, he didn't qualify for any of this, not even partially. And he was a helpless fetus and suffered because of their actions. But to put the icing on the cake, these payouts were known as ex gratia payments. I think I'm saying that right, ex gratia, meaning the Canadian government also took no responsibility for their actions. So it's basically a payout to avoid liability and just silence the victims.
Wait, they didn't take responsibility? So what were these payments then? Like, how do they say it? Like, if you just happened to be worked on by this guy, then you get... That's so
Pretty much
confusing that it wasn't them taking responsibility.
Well, that's what the ex gratia means. Is it's like they did it out of the kindness of their hearts because these people were obviously messed up by this, but it wasn't their fault.
That's bizarre. Lloyd even received a letter from the Canadian Minister of Justice at the time, Alan Rock, who said, "Payments under this plan are made on compassionate and humanitarian grounds to former patients. As the Government of Canada does not accept any liability or negligence for the treatment given to patients of Dr. Cameron, we have limited this payment to former patients. The government can only do so much." They did it! And therefore, limiting payments was necessary.
Wow.
But they can only do so much. They're the ones that did it in the first place.
Right? And then they go on to pat themselves on the back for being compassionate and on the side of humanity, even though, like you said, they funded this, and it was such a destructive program. Like, if anyone else did this, they would have been held responsible. But because they did it, well, it wasn't our fault.
So much scary.
But would paying these reparations to people who were in utero of patients at the time of these crimes really cost that much more to the government anyway? Like, saying that they can only do so much is such a slap in the face to Lloyd. Because how many other people were actually in utero at the time of these crimes? Probably not many. So they couldn't make this exception for him.
Right.
Because it's such a unique case. It's seriously disgusting. Also, if we get disappeared, you know where to look.
What?
Just
I don't like that at all. Well, Lloyd is just as confused and frustrated as we are about this treatment. No one is taking any responsibility. No one has apologized to him or his family or any of the other victims for ruining so much of their lives. Lloyd is just one of hundreds of people who have suffered because of these experiments, and him, along with many more of them, have banded together and filed 2 lawsuits, hoping to force the Canadian government into apologizing for its support.
Yeah, how hard is it to just apologize? I think it would go such a long way for these people who have suffered so much without having to spend a cent. Just apologize. Mm-hmm. And yet the Canadian Department of Justice has said that Canada has already, quote, taken action to provide assistance to those affected. So they just don't give a crap.
To those affected, they wiped their minds. And seriously, like, everybody knows what they did. So what difference would it make if they just apologize? Or, like, to them, what difference would it make?
Yeah, and it's funny they say to those affected because Lloyd was absolutely affected.
Yeah, if they're
and
gonna,
yet he didn't qualify.
If they're gonna belittle it to the word affected, then Lloyd's in the, he's there.
Well within the bounds of that.
Oh my gosh. On top of that, at the McGill University, they still have a portrait of Ewan Cameron hanging alongside the other past directors with his name removed.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense to me. Not only do they not care that they're memorializing this criminal, but they're also trying to hide it by removing his name to avoid controversy. It's like a double cowardly...
Why would that do the trick?
I don't know. They claim that it's out of empathy for those impacted, but if that were true, the photo would be gone. Or even better, a plaque that speaks about the atrocities committed by him on their grounds in their hospital and apologizing for those things. But nope.
This is why
they're just trying to erase history.
This freaks me out, man. This stuff freaks me out so much.
I know.
So just to summarize this, Esther Schrier was an orphan with terrible odds to find success, who worked hard to overcome her circumstances and become a nurse. She became a grieving mother who lost her firstborn little girl. She suffered from postpartum depression and anxiety, so she sought what was touted as the best medical help money could buy, hoping to get her life back on track. But she unwittingly became a subject of government-funded experimentation to research interrogation torture and mind control, given drugs like LSD and forced to endure 29 electronic shocks to the brain, completely deleting her personality, as well as many useful skills she learned throughout her life as an orphan and nurse. Then she felt too ashamed of her condition to speak up about it because she was embarrassed by what she'd become.
And yet the government won't apologize for their role in making this happen. How much more frustrating can it get for a person? We literally pay these people, the government, over a quarter of the money that we work hard to earn to create a society that we can feel comfortable living in. And this is what they spent it on? And yet, when something tragic like this happens, they take no responsibility. It's just plainly an abuse of power. There's no other way to put it. And it's despicable.
Esther Schrier went on to do her best to live a normal life, but the only way she could get by was under the care of her husband and son. But eventually, she developed cancer, which went on to take her life in 2017.
All right. Well, that's Esther's story. It's a mind bender.
Oh.
They have so much power that they can abuse, and they take advantage of that. They know that no one can hold them accountable. It's scary. But like we mentioned earlier, we are going to be going into more detail about Dr. Ewan Cameron over on Patreon in our 20th premium episode. So go check that out. It should be out soon. But we also have some listener stories coming up soon, which we're really happy to be sharing. So thank you to those amazing listeners who have reached out to us and shared their stories with us. Again, you can reach us at vovpodcast@gmail.com or on Instagram at vovpodcast or on Facebook at the Voice of the Victim Support System. That's the best place to go if you want to interact with other listeners of this show. It's a nice little community over there. We really need to be better about contributing to it. I'm going to work on that. But thank you to everyone who's already a part of it. I think Facebook groups are so much better for interacting with people than Facebook pages, because pages don't show anybody anything you post unless you pay Facebook. But groups do notify members of what you post. Like, everyone gets a notification when you post. So that's pretty cool. So if you want to be a part of that, go join. It's a closed group, but we approve people pretty fast. And we just ask that everyone remain respectful. So now that that's out of the way, Rosie, do you have any more thoughts to share before we wrap this up?
I need like a lollipop or something.
Lollipop.
Just to give myself a breather, some innocence. Man, this freaks me out. I've said it a lot, and we'll say it again, that the government has the power to do this and not have any consequences. And then if they want to, they'll pay out money, but still not be responsible.
Yeah.
freaks me out so much.
Like, this is an official true story. So that's what scares me.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I don't have much more to say other than I'm scared. But what do we do?
Exactly. What can you do? All we can do is...
Nothing. Have a lollipop. Chill out.
Exactly. Have a lollipop. Do the things in life that make us happy, because
Tomorrow,
we gotta enjoy.
you might be part of an experiment.
Yeah. I don't think it's a reason to go freaking out and looking for reasons to be suspicious of everybody or everything. I think it's just be aware of it and enjoy life while you got it.
Right.
It's almost like losing someone in death, this happening, because when their personality is deleted, they're gone. Except you can't move on because they're still there. It's got to be so weird to have a loved one just be deleted. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine?
I can't. That would be so bizarre.
Okay, well, I feel like every episode ends on a real downer. But I guess that's just life, huh?
I guess that's just life.
That's life. Wasn't that in Joker? Anyway, well, we better wrap this up. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye.
Keep hanging in there.
Yep, get your lollipop, guys. Bye.